Hello, hello, and welcome to Old Women Who Write. I'm Jean Palin. I'm glad to have you back here. I think you're going to enjoy our talk today. It's about writing. It's always about writing, but it's also about the topics that we write on. So I have here today Susan Zimmerman. Susan is a member of Old Women Who Write, and we're
Proud.
just going to chat. We're
Yep.
going to chat. So Susan,
Hi.
let me get my first question. Where are you in this? I know you're in the United States, but where?
I'm in Maryland, in
Oh, you
Frederick.
are in Maryland. I didn't know that.
Where are
Oh,
you?
I'm in
Yeah.
North Carolina, but I was recently in Maryland
Oh,
promoting my
wow.
book. I would
Wow.
have invited you to one
I
of the
know.
parties.
And I would have gone out to lunch with you if you'd had time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, well,
I brought you dinner.
next time. Um, so Susan has written a book that I read several months ago and enjoyed called Hear My Words. But you haven't always been a writer, right? Is this kind of
Well,
writing new to you?
no, writing is actually not new to me. I have back in the day when we were young and innocent, I went to college to get a degree in creative writing.
Mhm.
And, um, and then I was poor for a long time.
Yeah.
And then I went to graduate school and I got I got interested in linguistics and languages because it was one of the few things I was good at besides writing. Um, and I ended up, long story longer, as an English as a second, teaching English to speakers of other languages.
Yeah.
And I lived in Mexico for a long time, but I never stopped writing. I always wrote articles. I always wrote nonfiction, not well, what you call it, just journalistic articles. And I wrote those and featured things. I wrote for the newspaper in Mexico City and for the expat magazines.
Mm.
And then when I came back to the United States, I actually got a job as a writer and editor for an education magazine.
Mm.
And then I decided, no, I need to be back in teaching. That's where the kids are. That's where I wanted to be. And so I did that, but I still kept doing freelance articles for about these 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 children who came to the United States, and
Mm.
how to educate them, but also what their issues were, and how to consider them when you're looking in the whole issue of immigration.
Yes.
So yeah, so I have been doing this. This is my first work of fiction.
Okay. And we'll talk about the topic of the of that book,
Ooh.
but talk to me about why would you choose to write in fiction?
Um, the only answer I had to that is I always wanted to.
Uh,
That's what I thought I wanted to do, and now, um, so the pandemic, so much goes back to the pandemic. I was sitting in the
yes.
pandemic, going crazy, thinking I could die. I mean, we are old women who write. We're not
Yep.
healthy middle-aged people who write. And I had my own issues. And I could by next week, this time I could be dead, and I will never have written my novel. I wanted to write a novel, so
Yes.
I guess I'm not alone the way you're nodding your head. And
No.
I said, okay, well, I got nothing to do. I got nowhere to go for the next couple months, so that's what I'll do. So that's what I did.
That absolutely explains feisty
Good. I
Marvel
love it. Hey,
pieces. The
I love
pandemic.
humor.
It's
Yep.
the same thing, the
Yeah.
same thing. The pandemic hit, and I was then like 80 years old, and I thought, oh, hell, here I am, and I may go. I
Yep.
have lung issues. I'm a prime candidate for going away. So yeah, it was pretty, pretty significant. I think not just for you and for me, but for a lot of people in that way. And it may have had different sort of outcomes
Right.
from the realization that we may not have the time we just sort of assumed we have. And we became pretty creative, I think, many of us.
Uh-huh. I think there was a meme for some of those Facebook things that says, the problem is you think you have time.
Yeah.
And I mean, ever since I turned, 60, ever since I retired, well, I also have an illness, a chronic thing going on. And ever since that, I thought, people are like crazy. They don't know today could be your last day. So
right.
I've tried to be very cognizant, but that's not what we're talking about.
I know, but it's
But still,
interesting.
yeah, yes, the
Yeah.
pandemic
Yeah,
was
I have to say that fiction has always just scared me to death. I cannot imagine writing fiction. I think it would take another pandemic to get me to try fiction because it's so frightening because I have labeled myself my whole life as a non-creative person.
oh my goodness, that's
I
crazy.
know.
I
And
think honestly, I think being a lawyer is very creative because to me, creativity is just problem solving.
yeah,
I could not imagine anything more problematic than sitting in front of a judge trying to figure out how you're going to get your client or your whatever it is out of the problem they're in now. I gotta figure
actually, what
something
it
out.
really worked out as when you were a civil rights lawyer for the federal government is that you can't imagine how sitting in front of a political appointee whose beliefs are different than yours, how you can creatively present your argument so that they buy it. That's
Oh, we have got to get together. I would just love to talk to you.
okay. Let's talk. Let's talk about your writing. So, hear my words. I know what it is. Give our watchers, listeners, the short form. What is this book about?
Okay, this is a story about a young girl who comes to the United States. She was very popular back in her own country. She was 13, 14 years old, and she was like the Miss Miss Universe back in her country in her tiny little town. She comes to the United States to a god awful, I'm just going to say it, ghetto uh, middle school. She's completely lost. She doesn't know the language. She's just miserable. She's lucky to make the acquaintance of a young lady who's from I guess El Salvador, who has no other friends, but for some reason she takes a shine to her and she becomes sort of her mentor and her friend. As time goes on, she realizes that her friend has some sort of secret life with a boyfriend that she won't let the girl, her name's Gabby, she won't let her into that part of her life. And then it sort of comes out during the story that this she's involved with this young man, from her former life in her former country, and
Gentleman could be a stretch.
yeah, well, yes, okay, so he's a gang leader,
Yeah, thank you.
and we find that out later. But so she feels like her friend is becoming more and more distant, and it turns out that in her school, the gang liaison leader and her teacher and other people are trying to, in fact, get her friend, by the way, her friend's name is Jazz from Jasmine, to get her out of the gang, but she won't leave.
Yeah.
And in the end, she ends up being murdered by
Ooh.
someone in the gang.
Mhm.
And it's not fiction. This is the answer to the question, why did you write fiction? It's not fiction, it's the true story of my student. And that's why I wrote it, because it had been 2 years and it was a big deal in the newspapers.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, everyone had forgotten about the girl who was murdered and stabbed 13 times in a park and left to die. I want to see your face. That was my face too. And those were students we knew. Um, Gabby, the girl who comes from Honduras, she is not. She is fictional.
Mhm.
So I was not. I sensed very strongly when I tried to interview people about the young lady, about the situation, about what happened. No one would talk to me.
Really?
School district made it very clear that I would be liable for something if I were to write something, because they are school districts are very conservative. They don't want any implication that they didn't do everything they could have done, which they did everything they could have done. Anyway, so that's really why it turned out to be fiction.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And
Oh,
did it give you satisfaction to write this novel?
yes, I did feel that I had told the young lady's story. Um, it was, perhaps I made it fictional. Perhaps things happened that never happened. There was no Gabby. Um, in the end, Gabby saves her brother from the gang. That never happened. Gabby and her brother do exist, in a different universe of teaching. In
Mhm.
the book, this is lighthearted. In the book, the teacher's cell phone is stolen by Gabby's younger brother Eduardo, and that really happened. That whole thing was just taken out of reality.
Wow.
I do find that I do not believe I could be a fantasy writer or a science fiction writer or a dystopian future writer. The amount of work, they call it world building, that goes into that,
Hmm.
to come up with a whole new world is just beyond me. I basically sit and write what I know. With
Hmm.
the current book, not so much. But yeah, I think I took the I think my background in writing nonfiction is what I use to build on to make the fiction. I just think fiction writing could be so challenging.
Yeah, I agree with you. I particularly I couldn't write future. I also couldn't write past, and that has to do with the amount of work, research would be involved in writing, historical novels. If you want to do it well, you really need a whole lot of work, and I get bored easily, so I'm not.
And you know that the minute you put something on paper and out into the public, there's somebody out there that's going to say, "Nah,
Yeah,
that didn't happen."
and they'll probably be right.
Absolutely,
There
absolutely
is
right.
that. There is that. Well, do you, what did you hope would come from writing this novel?
So I have very limited aspirations. If I were like in my 30s or had been a struggling writer my whole life, I would have definitely, I want to make this a book that many people read.
Yeah.
By the time I was finished, this was my first fiction. This is my first novel writing this long. And I thought, I just want to get it done. I want to respect that this student is somehow memorialized.
Yes.
Um, I was shocked on Amazon when I saw someone from Japan had read it.
Mm.
Because I think somebody else asked me, well, how well is your book done? I said, well, my family and friends have read it, and they all seem to like it. And that was actually all right for me.
Yeah.
I do not feel the same thing about the book I'm writing now, so that's a different story. But yeah, um, I just it was a part of me that felt like I had to tell her story.
Hmm. Hmm. The We talked for just a minute before we came on the program about that part of my background in civil rights law was making sure that educational systems, public education, that they were, in fact, dealing appropriately and assuring kids with limited English proficiency the equal opportunity for education. And that, of course, wasn't always easy. Anything that's going to cost school districts money is never easy. So, there are changes that can be made in other civil rights areas, but for kids with limited English proficiency or kids with disabilities,
Hmm.
that require school districts to come up with resources, new resources, different kind of resources than they've had to do before. It's always, I think, a challenge. So I watched a lot of school districts, even though what I would call the good ones, the ones who really were trying and meant well, have difficulty. Now, it seemed to me that the the ones for kids with limited English proficiency, it was only a matter of money. It wasn't a matter of anything else. It was a matter of being able to hire the right people, I
Hmm.
guess, to deal with the kids. Do you see it differently?
Oh, very, very differently. For one thing, it's not a matter of money. They get buckets of money from the federal government. Do they get enough? No, but there is a lot of money from the federal government. And my friend and I used to, she's still a consultant, but I worked with her as a consultant on educating second language, ESOL, let's call them ESOL kids, second language
Yeah.
kids. And one thing we did was almost every May, she'd get just so many requests for training because they had all of this federal money they had to get rid of, because if they don't spend all their federal money, they won't get it next time. Meanwhile, all year long, their students are languishing. There are school districts that just ignore it. Or they don't know. My friend has gone to so many school districts who will say, "Oh, I didn't know I had to keep records. Oh, I didn't know I had to report this to the federal government." Um, there is never enough money, but is there money? Yeah, there's money, and there's training, and there's whatever school districts need. They just actually choose not to.
Mm.
So that's Susan on her soapbox.
Oh, it's a good soapbox. I'm glad
Yeah,
you're on it.
yeah.
Did
You'll
you
be
find in with education that it was, uh, I would guess that the younger the kids are when they come into the country, the easier it is for them both to learn a new language and to not have it have the serious social effects that it has for older kids, you're
like
like Gabby. Uh,
Gabby. Yeah. Um, Social effects. It's interesting because my children um, moved back to the United States from Mexico when they were younger. But then my oldest daughter, the second time we came back and forth, she came back when she was in seventh grade,
mhm.
and um, Gabby is just a little bit draws from my daughter's experience. She had a really hard time. She was miserable.
So she
She had
did not speak English when she came back?
She did. She spoke enough English. It wasn't the language, it was the social thing that just
Oh,
made her so miserable. Um, Again, she was the queen of Mexico. And, because she was a cute little blonde girl with big blue eyes. And then she came here and she was just, no, no, she was just another kid.
yeah,
So a lot of Gabby's discomfiture is based on her.
yeah.
Anyway, and as far as language, see, you asked a language expert. You should never have asked me.
I'm looking at your cat's tail. It's
I,
fabulous. The
yeah,
cat wants to be part of this interview. Sorry.
I think she wants me to do is let her out. I'm not going to let her. You had your chance, kid.
No, she's
Um,
just fine right there.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Um, yeah, and I think there's a lot of writers with cat language. But, anyway, I forget the point. What were we talking
Oh,
about?
well, yeah. Oh, welcome
Something
to
about
my
the
world.
leg.
Yeah,
Oh
just
yeah,
talk about your daughter and the social difficulty of
yeah,
being
yeah,
back
yeah,
here.
yeah. Anyway, going back to the language thing, yes, it's easier for young children to learn, but only because the burden of language that they need to get along is not as great. If
Oh,
you have a child going to kindergarten, I mean, what he learns English very quickly. Um, a
mhm,
child who is 13 years old in middle school needs a whole lot more language to get along.
right.
Besides the social aspect, they have to know they're learning math, they're learning social studies, they're learning all sorts of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. You reminded me when you were talking about going from being the sort of queen bee to,
Mm.
I have a niece who grew up in China. She's
Oh
American and
yeah.
she grew up in China in Shanghai for most of her life and came back at, well, she's just ready for college, so 18, to the US. Well, in China, she was, an oddity. When she was a
Hmm.
foot taller, she's also tall. So she was a foot taller than everyone else, and yes, blonde hair and blue eyes. But she had a great time. She fit in as a unique person. And they came back a year ago to the United States, where to Hoboken, New Jersey, or Jersey City, excuse me, where she went into a school that had a lot of Ukrainian refugees.
Oh
Now she's
my.
one of many, many, many tall, blonde young girls, right? And she had to figure out who she is now,
Yeah.
who she
Yep.
is. So
Yeah.
it doesn't match the kind of isolation that came for the characters in your book or the characters in real life who come. So, will this continue to be your passion, you think?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I'm working on another book now,
Oh,
which
tell
is
me about it.
sure. Well, the book Hear My Words was written for my students. It was written, I mean, I don't have them anymore, but it was written for my middle school students. And I love my middle school students. And it was written on the level that they could hopefully, at least if they couldn't read it themselves because of the language, if their teacher read it aloud to them, they would be able to understand it. Because I wanted to honor their experience. The the book I'm working on now is called A Cord of Three Strands. from a Bible verse that I really don't know, that someone told me about, something about one strand. It's about weddings.
What?
Uh,
What?
it's from Are you a Bible fan? It's from the
Oh,
Ecclesiastics, and it says one. Yeah, me either. And to my bed, yeah. Anyway, it says a cord of one strand is easily broken. Two strands makes it stronger, but a cord of three strands will never be,
uh-huh.
something to that effect.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I'm there like, oh, okay, because this story is about three students, again, taken from students I know, but I completely fictionally, well, I thought I had fictionally made up a lot of their story. And the story mostly takes place back, it starts in Honduras. And the point of the story is to show people that when they say, send them back where they came from, they can't. They can't go back. They'll die immediately. And so part of the story is just to show how horrific the conditions are they come from.
Yes.
Nobody willingly says, hey, let me go travel 2,000, 3,000 miles by myself through horrific conditions, starving to death, trying not to get, murdered or whatever, um, for the fun of it. Obviously, it's a big decision, and you don't want to leave what's left of your homeland and your family. Um, so it's a story about them. It's also a story about how they get here by themselves. They're poor. Most of them come on a train, riding the top of a train through Mexico called La Bestia, the Beast, and it's horrific in itself. You hang on to the top of the train when it's going 80 miles an hour. You hope you don't get thrown off. If you don't get thrown off, perhaps when you're getting on the train, you make a mistake and fall under the wheels and die. Bandits roam the top of the train and try to get your money. If you're a woman, you are so at risk, even in your own country. This is where I discovered through my research that the femicide, violence towards women, is is graphic and prevailing in South Central America, not South Central America, and parts of Mexico. So I had to work that into it.
Hmm.
Um, that's their story. Their story is that they're coming to the United States to get away from that. The fictional part is that they come here, they get into a middle school or school, they're supposedly safe, and what do you know from the news headlines? There's a school shooter. Of course, there's a school shooter. And how they respond to the school shooter is, um, the climax of the story, I believe. So far, I haven't gotten to it yet, but it shows that they're actually uniquely qualified to deal with a school shooting, as much as it's a horrible disappointment to them that they come here and they know they didn't escape at all from the violence and horror of their families, of their life in their own country. But yeah, so then in the end, part of the end, they save themselves and their classroom from the shooter, and that's as far as I've come. Something
Susan, that's damn depressing.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I sent it to two beta readers. And a beta reader is a person who you send your book to read it along the way and say like, well, or oh yeah, or say I'm confused about this part. And
Right.
that is what one of them wrote back. She says, Susan, it's so depressing. And then I wanted to say, oh, you don't argue with beta readers. You say, okay, thank you. But
Yeah.
I wanted to say, but that's their life.
Yeah.
That's what those thousands and thousands of people amassing at your border. That's why they're there. It's depressing.
And is it your take as well as mine that whole situation has not been as yet appropriately highlighted of who's at the border, you know,
Oh, my
has
next
not been, the subject of the Netflix documentary or you know, am I,
Well, yes, there's one or two Netflix documentaries, but everybody wants to see the thing that happened, the latest episode of Murder She Wrote or whatever
yeah.
the local reality show. You're right. My neighbor says, "Well, no, we have to get rid of them because they are all drug
Yeah,
drug
well,
carriers and thieves and murderers and rapists. And, um,
you should
you
choose your
know,
neighbors more carefully.
I can't. You know, they're lovely people. Whenever I fall down and can't come up, I call them. They pick me up.
Sorry.
Your husband over to pick me up. Off the floor. Anyway, uh, yes. I mean, it's all misinformation. You know, fake news from another source, and
Right,
then there has not been any corresponding information coming out about the truth of the situation.
right.
And to be honest, if someone were to ask me, well, what's your solution, Susan? I would go,
Don't
I
know.
will. The solution is to fix their country so they don't come back.
Yeah.
But we send back, and probably rightly so, we send back gang members from Los Angeles. So their countries are now run by former gang members. So what do you expect? But I don't have a solution. I can only tell the stories.
I have a friend who moved to Mexico. I want to say northern Mexico, but I don't know the where of it. Um, and she learned Spanish, which was a good idea. And when she was proficient, after however long, she was took it on herself to write. She was living in a town that was not populated by a lot of expats. She was just there, and she decided to write a history of the town and in Spanish. And in doing so, doing research, that's when she discovered how horrendous the femicide and all other kinds of abuse toward women were in that little town she was in.
Did did she actually write the book or something?
She wrote a book of poetry
Hmm.
where the poems all had to do with it.
I was
It,
just wondering if I could contact her.
oh, I think that's a great idea. I will put you two in touch. Yeah.
Oh, thank
She
you.
didn't
I would
know
love
that
that.
she is a very shy person, but
Yeah,
she is.
it's fascinating, and I'd like to know that because I was thinking about that for my next.
Yeah,
Well, aren't we all?
yeah.
That's why we text and write.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So how
Oh,
far
cool.
along
That's
is the
so
book?
interesting.
And because a lot of the people on Old Women Who Write have a lot of issues about how do I get published? How did you publish? How did you get Hear My Words
I
published? Pardon?
I self-published. I looked at the time frame. It again, um, actually, pandemic notwithstanding, I'm 71, and you're 80. Some you say you're in your
80,
80s.
82.
Well, okay, so you may think I was like, well, you're jumping the gun here. You still got time left, but as we know, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. I know that nobody is, but be realistic. When you're in your 70s and 80s, you're really stretching it. So I looked at it around and I thought, well, let's say I wrote an amazing book that I could go pitch to an agent, and the agent says, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm gonna, sell that book around, trying to find you a publisher." Well,
Yep.
even that would take 2 years.
Yep.
Finding an agent, then getting a publisher, and then for a publisher to get by that time would be 2 or 3 years more to get it published. And no, I don't have that time.
Yeah. I do hear
And
you. Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's the that between entirely self-publishing or hybrid publishing, they're the only ways for us to go, period.
I did attend a writers conference
Mhm,
last month, and I did meet an agent, a real live New York City agent,
mhm,
and he was very, very up. I mean, he didn't represent my kind of book. It was for the new one
mhm.
about the violence and such. But he said that is, and he said, as you said, this is a very important topic.
Yep.
Somebody needs to hear about this. So I encourage you to go ahead and write it. And that kind of gave me hope that maybe, wow, maybe I could get it published by a traditional publisher. So I might shop it. I mean, I might try it.
Mhm. I
Why
gave
not?
it a year. I gave it a year and could not
Okay.
get there. And
Okay.
that's when I had the same realization that you had. I don't have the time
Yeah.
for this. Yeah. All right.
And
Yeah. Guess what?
I
Time's up. We've
know,
been
and
talking and
I was about ready to ask you a question. So yeah, we should
yeah.
we should talk later. You got to. I'll come to New. Well, we could meet half. Well, do you ever come back to Maryland?
I do. Where are you in Maryland, though?
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm in Frederick, but I have a car.
My
We
daughter
could.
lives in Laurel, Maryland.
Oh yeah, well, see, that's not so far. And she lives in the epicenter of Hispanic neighborhoods. So
Epicenter of what?
Hispanic neighborhoods.
Yes, yes, she does.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Her children's names are Gabriela, Alejandra, and Micaela,
Oh my gosh.
and
Well,
her husband was Chilean. Yeah,
oh, did you say her husband's Chilean?
her former husband, yes,
The
is
father of her
Chilean.
children.
Yes, yes,
Wow. Well,
yeah,
she now lives in the land of the tacos. They have great
yes.
tacos.
So she gets
Not
along
that
well
big
there.
comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then I'll just hang out with her. Forget you.
That's right. That's a good idea. All right. Well, listen, Susan, it's been a
Yeah.
delight. See, there was
Oh,
nothing to be nervous about this whole deal, right?
oh,
You can tell other women and old women who write or
I,
anyone else that this is an easy breezy
yeah.
process, just like having a cup of coffee with
Yeah.
a
In fact,
friend.
I say, hey, you want to spend some, quality time with a good person? Here, just talk to her.
Right.
Yeah. It was wonderful to meet you.
It's wonderful
But
to meet you, and I wish you so well, and I'll be anxious for your newest book to come out. So hooray. Keep
well, thank
doing
you.
what you're doing.
And I will read feisty because that's my favorite word.
Yeah, oh good. Well, yeah, you're gonna love Feisty. Trust me, you're gonna love it.
Love
Um,
the
okay, so everybody, thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you'll come back for more because we got one hell of a dynamic group of old women who write.
feisty, and they all need encouragement.
Okay, now I have to figure out how to turn this off. Oh, right, I found